Welcome to Unpacking Peanuts, the podcast where three cartoonists take an in-depth look at the greatest comic strip of all time, Peanuts by Charles M. Schulz.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. It's Unpacking Peanuts. We're here in 1986, the year of, Karate Kid 2. And the birth of Lady Gaga, all kinds of exciting things.
These are notable events.
Wow, that's your research for this year.
That's my research, and it happened right off the top of right live, just like that. Oh, and it was probably also, I think, the 100th anniversary of the Statue of Liberty. Those are the three big things.
Wow.
Okay. Karate Kid 2, Statue of Liberty, Lady Gaga. I'll be your host for the proceedings. My name's Jimmy Gownley. I'm also a cartoonist. I did things like Amelia Rules, 7 Good Reasons Not to Grow Up, and The Dumbest Idea Ever. And you can read my brand new comic, Tanner Rocks, on Substack right now. I'll tell you more about it later. Joining me as always are my pals, co-hosts, and fellow cartoonists. He's a playwright and a composer, both for the band Complicated People, as well as for this very podcast. He is the original editor of Amelia Rules, the co-creator of the original comic book price guide, and the cartoonist behind such great strips as Strange Attractors, The Gathering of Spells, and Tangled River. It's Michael Cohen.
Say hey.
And he's the executive producer and writer of Mystery Science Theater 3000, a former vice president of Archie Comics, and the current creator of the Instagram sensation Sweetest Beast. It's Harold Buchholz.
Hello.
So I've been cyberbullied.
Oh.
I have been cyberbullied by a bunch of nerds. There were a bunch of nerds got together, and when more than 4 nerds get together, they're aggrieved. So I'm going to tell you all about my tragic cyberbullying story, but I'll do it later at the mail.
Poor sweet baby.
Because it ties into the mail. Yes, I am a poor sweet baby. Thank you, Harold. Thank you. I appreciate it. But that'll be the second half of the show. Before that, we're going to be talking about 1986, the strips in 1986. I have to say, I thought this was really funny. I thought this was a very funny year. I liked that it was a lot of short little gags and not too many really long stories. It felt really good to me. Harold, what are your thoughts about 1986? You got anything interesting?
To me, it felt kind of, I don't know, small, insular. It just seems like, a life that's getting a little more concentrated and a little more homey, I guess is one way to put it. The other thing that I noticed just reading the first 4 months of strips that I count my strips for the anger and happiness index, but something that stood out to me was that Schulz had, I counted that 34 strips, over a quarter of the strips had something to do with bodily harm or pain or body failure or lack of safety. And I was feeling this, I don't know, I feel this empathy towards Schulz because I just get the sense that he's dealing with issues of pain in his life, right? He's getting a little older and it's everywhere. And, there's jokes about internal bleeding. I mean, it's a really interesting new world for Peanuts. I mean, it's all that stuff's been in there before. Obviously, you had characters knocking each other out in this, but now we have ganglion cysts and all sorts of things. It's just an interesting new development or emphasis in the strip.
Well, now we'll have the title for the episode. Now we have ganglion cysts.
You have a ganglion cyst, Charlie Brown.
That's where I stopped reading the books, right? right. That one, and then it was What's That Goiter, Snoopy? No one wanted those two strips. Michael, what were your thoughts? This is I feel that this is the year that the 80s start slowly turning towards the 90s. But what are your thoughts?
Not crazy about this year. To me, it's just been a slow progression into the unfunny. It's like a journey into a strip that doesn't seem really exceptional anymore. But that's just me.
All right, so let's journey into the unfunny. for the next hour and a half.
That's the name of my next comic book.
Finally, truth in advertising.
Yeah. No, but there was also the very disturbing appearance of Zippitone again.
Well, there is going to be there is going to be
There's
some
Zippitone
history there.
all throughout the 90s. And one thing that's great about that is we're actually going to be able to point to something and go, that is Zippitone. Because I think it is still confusing.
Right.
To some.
What's
to some
the difference
people who haven't
between
used it.
Kraft Hint and Zippitone?
It's just the brand name. Zippitone's actually a brand name. I use Zippitone in quotes, all 3 shades of gray, but I've never actually used Zippitone. I always use Letratone. So it was Letratone, Kraft Hint, and Zippitone. But Zippitone, even though it was the famous brand name, was gone decades ago. And now you can only buy it through like jet pens and stuff. You could get it for making manga, but it's terrible. It's small sheets. The dots are printed digitally. It's terrible.
Yeah, it's just it's a first appearance here in this year. It really makes me wonder what inspired him. I mean, did he have a finished strip and go, there's something missing here? Oh,
I think it's the hand trimmer. That's what I think. You know,
but it's not. It's something. It was the doghouse. No, it was the beanbag. Mm-hmm. Which isn't normally inked. I mean, he doesn't do anything with texture.
I think that he's seeing his strip being a little more sparse and showing that tremor more and more. I think that's what he's doing. What struck me, and I don't know, obviously, just as complete guess, but he really did that. Putting black on the half of the panel behind the head of a character like Peppermint Patty in Classroom, often you'll see it, that we had noted a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. I noted that hadn't done that for a while, and then he did it in a daily strip, and then it was like just a few days later, I think, that Zippitone showed up. So I was wondering, he was troubleshooting, trying to, how can I make this visually arresting? How can I catch people's eye? Because he was a competitive guy. He's in the newspapers, and the strips of 1986 that he's competing against are not the strips of 1950 when he started. And I just think he's playing around, saying, hey, how do I get just a few more eyeballs? How do I get more people to see it and for me to look at this?
Well, right before the Zippitone came in, he put a big black area behind Marcy in a school strip, which you couldn't interpret as anything. It wasn't like a wall or anything. It was just a big black area right behind her.
And maybe he thought, when he was playing with that, he's saying, sometimes that look is just a little too harsh and I can't get away with it in certain strips. How can I add some visual interest?
Yeah. But he starts with the Zippitone on particular objects. Now, I don't know where it goes from here, but it's the beanbag and the doghouse get zipped first.
And the reruns bike seat.
Okay. Anyway, that's just part of the trend.
And I'll put the Zippitone explanation in the obscurities. I'll bring it to the top of the obscurities.
All right, well, I'll just quickly mention it right now. Zippitone is a way to produce something that looks like gray in a medium that only reproduces black and white. So a newsprint, back in the day, you only could have black ink on the newsprint paper. So in order to create a gray, you would do what's called a halftone, which is just dots. And the further dots are apart, the fainter the gray is. The closer they are together, the darker it is. Zippitone is just adhesive back sheets of those dots, which you cut out and you put on the drawing in the places you want to have gray. So that explains it. And we'll point it out to you when we get there. And if you want to follow along with us, you can do a couple of things. The first thing you got to do is you got to go over there to unpackingpeanuts.com. You got to sign up for the good old Great Peanuts reread, and that'll get you an email once a month from a good pal, Harold, and it will tell you what strips we're going to be covering in the upcoming month. And then you'll know what we're talking about and you'll be hip. So when you're hanging out at the water cooler, you'll be all like, I think they're covering Zippitone next week in Unpacking Peanuts. And the other people will be like, what? It'll blow their minds. So you're going to do that. And then you could just go over to gocomics.com, type in the year, in this instance, 1986. And you can go along with us. Away you go. following along, reading the strips for free. Amazing. Let's go back to 1986 when everybody wanting to rule the world was just a song. January 3rd, Snoopy's atop the doghouse and he's typing away and he writes, Dear blank. And the next panel, I miss you more each day. I love you more than words can say. In the next panel, Charlie Brown comes up, reads what Snoopy has been writing and says, That's nice, but who are you writing to? And then Snoopy says, I can always fill that in later.
Now, I didn't realize that Snoopy was a cad.
That's just a great joke.
He's a cad.
I think that's hilariously funny. He is. And it's so Snoopy, right? It totally shows Snoopy's love him and leave him persona.
Well, these dogs are people he's writing to.
We don't know.
We don't know.
Yeah, maybe it's Miss Helen's sweet story.
Yeah, maybe. It could be whomever he wishes it to be. But I like that. That made me laugh right out of the gate for 1986. Real funny. And so did this. January 18th, Charlie Brown and Linus are at the thinking wall. And Charlie Brown says, Nobody appreciates how wishy-washy people suffer. In panel 2, Charlie Brown and Linus are walking along, and Charlie Brown says, Our lives are in constant torment. Charlie Brown continues, You know what wishy-washy people need? And then he ends it with, Cringe benefits.
So
That's
we
good.
know that Schultz really liked wordplay because
Yes.
Jeannie told us he really liked puns.
Yeah.
I like cringe benefits. I think that's really funny. I like seeing Linus and Charlie Brown together.
What do you think of them floating over the black pathway in the fourth
They've
panel?
been floating for decades at this point. I don't even notice. But they're on the line definitely in panel 2.
But I've not seen it where you're looking. Well, yeah, you got a background, and then you've got the ground underneath.
No, here what it's not that there's
actually drawing. He's actually drawing the background under their feet, where it actually does look like they're floating.
Well, he's
So,
done
like,
that too.
fence.
That's not the problem. The problem is that the fence is 3 inches high. That's the problem. If he would have just drawn the fence the correct size, I don't think you would even be noticing it.
Oh, you don't think that's a little doggy fence or something? You know
Well,
how
if
they
it
do
is,
the-
it doesn't read like that. It
fence
just
along the
looks
way.
like a fence. Or what is a little doggy fence? I mean, no, there's fences are.
You haven't seen the little picket fences that are about 6 inches high around or 8 inches high around someone's house.
Is that to keep a Smurf in? No, I have
Yeah,
a Bichon, and it wouldn't keep.
Well, that would be
keep her
80s.
in.
Yeah.
No, I this is just an awkward drawing of the fence, and I think a part of the reason for the zipatome is it's not just that he has a tremor; it's that the tremor causes a lot of fatigue, and fatigue causes things to be wrong sometimes, and that's just a part of the fact that the guy is doing this for however many decades at this point. But from his point of view, he's just drawing the characters bouncing along the way he always has.
Plus, no one has ever noticed this before in the history of man.
That's right.
We're so used to them kind of bounce. I assume this means little kids kind of like skip and bounce and when they walk. And I assume it means they're just kind of jauntily bouncing down the road.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's interesting here also, you're saying that the tremor is something obviously he's having to deal with. It appears that he has gotten to the place where he's shrinking the panels. We talked about this before. If you have a tremor and that is noticeable, you have two choices. Three choices. One is to stay the size you are. One is to go bigger, which would mean the tremor would be supposedly less noticeable. And the other is to go smaller because it's getting harder to draw. And it looks like he's gone with drawing smaller because the strips look a little thicker in terms of the line. He's using the same pen. He's just now working with less area. The size of the strip is not as large in relationship to what it is in the newspaper and the versions that we're looking at in the Fantagraphics books. And so with that thickness, there is I guess maybe a more designy simplicity that is baked into the strip, because a thicker line means you can do less. You can do things that are a little less subtle. I mean, you look at those early 1950s strips. I mean, his line was super fine, even into the 70s, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but again, we may be looking at photocopies. Well, I may
Yeah,
be looking at photocopies. I'm on Go Comics. I doubt that we are for Fantagraphics, but
yeah, but I guess, and again, those who have own or have seen the original strips, they might be able to enlighten us as to there are certain times when he absolutely did shift to a different size of the strips, and I've seen them like in galleries. I've seen the later strips, and they are significantly smaller. Yeah,
I think that's a huge mistake, actually, because I don't think that it will help you. I think you'll be covering less area, and it seems like, but I think being fussy and drawing in a smaller area, I find is much harder. I have a bad tendonitis at this point, and I have that weird genetic tremor, and I've just been drawing much bigger panels, and boy, is it fun.
How big are you working now?
Well, I'm still working 11 by 17, but like Amelia was based on like a 12 panel grid, which no one like these are
right. Yeah, you put a lot on a page. Yeah.
These are, by the way, the things that are actually go into making a comic that no reviewer will ever talk about. They talk about like the zippy line and the fun colors and the emotional story. You're not even, that stuff's the candy on top of the ice cream. Like figuring out how many panels are on a page, how you're going to transition from panel to panel, turning the page, all that stuff is how the story is told. So Amelia was based on a 12 panel grid.
Wow.
Which is now nobody even does anymore, because that's, again, a lot of work.
It is.
But so now, like, I'm doing this new story, Tanner Rocks, which is it's not really a prequel, but it's a story of Tanner when she was 14 years old, Amelia's aunt. And it's like 5 panels on a page. And it's much, much easier to draw in a big space.
I bet it's very dynamic too. I've seen you work when you have fewer panels per page, and it's really interesting. It takes me back. This is so Harold. But when I was growing up, and every penny counted, and comic books were getting more expensive in my day. They were starting to shoot up in price. It seemed like every year the price would go up as a little kid, and you're super sensitive to that because you don't have a whole lot of money. And I would count the number of panels in each comic, of course, just like I count the anchors and happiness index. And I'm like, oh, there's, and like Carl Barks, those of you who know the amazing duck artists for the Disney comics who did a lot of Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck stories, he would work on a four-tier page. And the standard in comics was 3, and then if you were into superhero comics, who knows what's going on with a superhero comic, because they were doing double page splash panels of cosmic events happening,
right.
And I was like, I'm getting cheated here. I'm getting like 70 panels out of a Marvel comic, and I might get 200 panels in a
That's amazing.
Scrooge or whatever.
I always saw it as kind of a cheaty way to do less work on a page. Kirby, especially in Marvel in the 60s, at some point went pretty much to just 4 panels a page. Even though there was a ton of detail, and that's considered by a lot of people as his best period. But to me, it didn't look right. And occasionally he would do like a full page spread of like somebody's thumbnail. I just went like, that's a way to make more money per hour.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that really struck me when I was looking at these comics is that was back when a comic was 32 pages plus a cover, and that was when Marvel was putting like 14 pages of ads in there at one point. So I was really, really cognizant of it. Now we're in the world of graphic novels, and you can get a 256 page graphic novel, and it doesn't matter anymore to me. Obviously, the money is not as big of an issue as when I was a kid. But now that's kind of cool to me, because you want to expand a story and make it flow over 200 pages. So you could have done it in like the album style of Belgium or whatever, where they put tons of panels on a page and work really large and print them big. But yeah, it's like now it's just a design choice, because you can have a longer book, a shorter book. Just what looks cool as a page now. Well,
here's if anyone's out there and they're thinking about being a cartoonist or anything like that, I'll tell you, the person I learned, the 2 people actually, obviously one is Cerebus, because was always my favorite comic. But the other person I really learned like the importance of panels on a page, how many, when to use a lot, when to use a little, is of all people, Frank Miller. And that's what I mean when you're talking about you would never look at The Dark Knight Returns and go, well, clearly that's like the third or fourth most influential thing on Amelia Rules. But it is. I got that. I was 14 years old. I got that. They only had 2,000 subscription copies available, and I asked for my birthday. So we sent, cut the little thing out of a comic and sent away for it. And I was like, oh my God, I was 14. This has 16 panels on every page. Oh my God, there's only bright color on the pages where Batman is. Oh my God, there's a shifting narrator for every single person, and they all have their own internal voice. All of that. Then you hear for 40 years, the critique of it is Frank Miller made Batman an interesting adult character. No, he didn't. It's a Batman comic, the same as any other Batman comic. But the way he told it was different from what other people were doing. That's what made it unique, innovative, and why people can still read it today, because people still haven't mastered that stuff. So if you're a cartoonist out there and you're looking for some influences, look outside your genre, your style. That's the place you're going to find stuff that will make you unique when you go back and bring it into your style.
Mm-hmm. There is an advantage to having a uniform page layout. Thinking of Jaime Hernandez, of course, it's all based on 9-panel grid. Sometimes they're a little bigger, but they all fit into that format. And I think it's because he kind of skipped around. He'd work a little bit on a page and he'd go, I don't want to draw this. He'd skip to the next page. And I think, Jimmy, you were doing that too, weren't you?
I still do that. Yeah, you have to force yourself to not do that when you work for big publishers, because the first thing you have to do is tell the story to someone who doesn't know how to write or draw, but it's part of your job requirement to make them happy.
It's its own art form, right?
Yeah, it's their own art form.
Something that doesn't exist to somebody who can somehow see enough to let you go forward.
So I'm not doing that anymore. So when you're working for a publisher, you have to tell them the comic before you draw the comic. You have to draw like a stick figure version or stuff like that. The problem I have with that, although I'm very proud of the books that came out of that system, Dumbest Idea and 7 Good Reasons Not to Grow Up. The problem is it's not how I do comics. And it's really not how comics have ever been done. There were no editors for comics. The editors for comics were people that would say, is that going to be in Wednesday? And hey, don't use the word flick, because if it prints wrong, it'll look bad. That's what editors for comics do. So I'm not doing that part anymore. And you shouldn't either, especially if you're starting out. Find unique, strange stuff. Figure out, why is Jaime Hernandez only using the same layout? What's the advantage of that? Try that for a week. Why did Frank Miller do 16 panels a page? Try that for a week. That's my little cartoonist tidbits for you this corner
week.
Yeah,
exactly. I had a kooky idea last week. I'm not going to do it, but I thought if you get stuck creatively, try this. Let's say you want to do a short story. You lay out 9 pages of 6-panel grids,
mm-hmm.
and then you roll dice to determine which panel you start drawing and writing in.
Mm-hmm.
So you start at page 3, panel 4. Okay, you go to page 3, panel 4. You don't know what the story is. You don't know who the characters are. You start drawing, and then you roll the dice again. It's page 1, panel 2.
Yeah, that's what I do. I just don't have the dice.
Yeah. Well,
I wrote an entire this is about going back to Amelia's style writing too. I wrote an entire conversation in Tanner Rocks. I didn't know who the second character was while I'm writing it. I know it's a friend of Tanner's. That's all I knew. Right? Just put it in there, and I like the way it came out, and that'll then jog. It'll create the character for you. And I'm sure this is the same thing. You have to try it now that you thought of it and announced it.
I don't even want to draw one panel. That's the problem.
January 21st. Charlie Brown and Sally are hanging out at the bus stop waiting for the bus to come, and Sally says, if the school bus doesn't come pretty soon, let's go home. Charlie Brown says, we probably should wait a little while longer. Sally says, how much longer? Charlie Brown says, how about 20 minutes? Sally sensibly says, how about 4 seconds?
She's got an attitude.
This just brought me back to, I hadn't thought about this conversation since I was a little kid, but I remember standing on the corner waiting for the school bus. And if it was 1 minute late, just hoping against hope, this would be the one day it didn't
It's
show
not
up.
coming.
But you still have to go to school.
Well, how
Yeah.
would you? If they didn't provide the bus, you don't have to go to school.
Well, I imagine they're not living in a huge city, aren't they? They like 5-minute walk from school. I always imagined it's nearby.
Well, I meant in real life. I'm not worried about them.
Right. But in this Peanuts sequence, they actually do wind up.
They do
walking.
walk,
That's
yeah.
how Charlie Brown gets in trouble.
Yeah.
Because, am I mixing this up with the previous event? But it's been established that they can get to school by foot.
Now here you'll see again him doing some stuff to just add a little more oomph or whatever. Like the black on what really now looks like briefcases that they're taking to school. I think in the past he probably would have just let those be white, but he's putting a little something in it.
Yeah.
How about those floating bushes in the background?
Boy, everything's floating this year. They look like cabbage, actually.
Yeah, those are probably Peanuts lunch boxes they're carrying.
That's what I had.
He had to black them out so it didn't get in trouble. I had one too. Yep. That thermos.
Yep. January 26th. Sally wakes up with a start in her very roughly little bed, and she runs out of her room to go find her big brother, who's in an easy chair reading, or a club chair rather, reading something. And Sally says, "When we die, will we go to heaven?" Charlie Brown says, "I like to think so." Sally says, "When we get there, will we meet all the bugs we've stepped on?" Charlie Brown says, "Will we what?" Sally asks, "Will we meet all the spiders and bugs and things we've stepped on all our lives? I'm wondering if we'll see all of them in heaven and if we'll have to apologize to them." She asks Charlie Brown, "What do you think?" Charlie Brown goes back to reading, saying, "I don't have the slightest idea." Sally looks around and then says, "There's a spider on the ceiling of my bedroom." And then she concludes with, "Why don't you pound it for me? You can apologize to it later."
Rolled eyes from Charlie Brown.
This is a St. Francis kind of thing here.
Yeah.
We're not counting the 2 or 3 people St. Francis killed in the Crusades. But, yeah, I take your point. I take your point. Bird-wise, spider-wise, Francis was on top of things.
What do you think of Charlie Brown's expression in the lower left when he says, "I don't have the slightest idea"? How would you describe that expression?
Uninterested, passive, back to what he was doing. Why?
More
Yeah.
interested in his comic book, clearly.
Yeah, a little dismissive. He's not absorbed in this deep theological concept that Sally's introducing, because he's not realizing the setup that she has for him.
Well, this is a classic mistake, right? Because when we die, will we go to heaven? I like to think so. So he's engaging because he thinks this is the topic.
Right.
But then she throws a curveball.
Sally's going further.
And we're talking about the bugs. And it's like, oh, I looked up. I thought we were going to have a conversation. Now we're talking about bugs. Okay, I'm going back to the comic.
Huh. Now, is that a shadow to the left of Sally?
Yeah.
First, I thought it was like a little shrub or something. But...
Yeah, no, he is actively putting abstract brushes of black to balance pages and stuff. As well as
I kind of like it.
This strip or the stripes on this chair.
That is some wild upholstery.
Yeah. By the way, this we've seen this chair before, which makes me think that this is a chair
an actual chair.
Yeah, but not with the stripes, but with the weirdness. It doesn't look like an extremely comfortable chair. It looks like it's missing the back cushion.
Mm-hmm.
It's got some hard edges on it.
Yeah.
But there's something about those shadows behind Sally that makes me think of nighttime, like being a little kid. There's something a little bit creepy about night, and those little blobs seem to have a little bit too much personality.
Well, it's a very harsh, dark shadow, which definitely gives that nighttime vibe. Now, if you look at the things in Sally's bedroom and that, like whatever that's supposed to be, the end table or whatever, you can see him struggling again with that trimmer. I like seeing Sally in her feety pajamas, though. I think she looks adorable in them. February 7th. Snoopy's atop the doghouse. He's typing on something, and Lucy comes up and asks, "You know what you should do? You should write a story that would excite the readers as the plot thickens." Panel 3, Snoopy thinks about this for a while. And in the last panel, Snoopy says, "In all the years I've been writing, I've never had a plot thicken."
What about suddenly a shot rang out?
Yeah, really. That's thick.
He moves fast sometimes in his storylines.
Well, I'm all for never having a plot thicken. I'm all for never having a plot.
Yeah, that's your style.
Yeah. Oh my!
Plots
when people
just get in the way of stories.
Oh gosh, yes. Oh, you know what? I never felt more seen. There's a podcast about creative blocks, and it's called The Blocks, and it's by the guy Neil Brennan, who is the co-creator of the Chappelle Show, and he had Jerry Seinfeld on, and they were talking about stories and how stories are so irritating. And anytime someone says, "Let me tell you a story," they just roll their eyes. And when Neil Brennan goes, "Oh God," and if someone says, "I'm a storyteller," he said, "It's just nauseating." And I was like, yes, finally, it is nauseating. I don't want to hear a story. I'm a 52-year-old man.
What is it? What is it about stories that's so off-putting?
It's missing the point.
Yes.
Like
the point is that things are pointless.
Yeah, the point should be I like a work of art where the form and the content fit together perfectly and leave me in a better state after it's over. A story is going to take me on a journey and leave me where I started every time. That's what a story does. And it has the beats, and it's like, oh, you'll see these ridiculous. I mean, everyone in the world has a YouTube channel apparently where they critique film, or in quotes, cinema. And it's like, well, at this point in the story, you're supposed to have this beat. And then at this point in the story, you're supposed to have this.
Yeah.
Right? No.
And there's nothing worse than the hero's journey.
Right, exactly. And there's nothing worse.
Then you have to meet the wise sage.
Right.
And then you have to be betrayed by your friend.
So they're saying a story is the story.
Well, I'm going to object for a second, because you all are good storytellers, and those of us who struggle, we need to be taught things.
Through story?
But Jimmy, the first Star Wars, that's a story.
Yes, the first Star Wars is a story. And there are great things that are stories. I have no problem with stories. But George Lucas wasn't, "I am going to tell you a story." What George Lucas was, "I'm going to give you an experience." It's gonna. When I was a kid, they had these things, and in my mind, they were incredible. You would go on a Saturday morning, and all this excitement would be happening. And you might even come in the middle, and you still had a thrilling experience. That's why Star Wars exists. Then Joseph Campbell came along and told him that he was a genius and the hero's journey, and then it becomes.
It wasn't the other way around.
No. Oh, I guarantee you. Lucas never thought of the hero's journey until Campbell.
I thought Campbell was way before.
Oh yes, Campbell was way before, but it doesn't mean Lucas read
may
him.
not have experienced.
Yeah, well, Tolkien too wasn't. I'm going to tell you a story. It's like, I'm going to take you to a world, and I'm going to with history and geography.
Is the concept of story? Well, it's gotten more and more inorganic, right?
Yes,
it's like people have broken it down into this skeletal frame. And said, okay, we now have figured out humans enough that you have to do this, 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 and this. And if you're off by this, everyone's going to feel it, and everyone's going to come down on you because it doesn't feel right.
Right.
And back in the day, this is the thing: all these amazing creative movies came out, let's say from Hollywood, and there were obviously ones that were very formulaic. But some of the most amazing ones, we didn't have Sid Field. We didn't have, James McKee, or all these people who tried to crack the code.
I have no idea
And
what
that's
you're
the thing
talking
that-
about.
Oh, he wrote that book. McKee wrote a book called Story, which is like considered the screenplay storybook written by a guy who like sold one screenplay.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how filled the margins are of my copy of Story as I was arguing with him all the way through. But there is something about storytelling, at least now,
Yeah.
where, and I don't know if that's what people are thinking when they say, let me tell you a story but there's no, I mean, I'm totally with you, Jimmy, when you say, I want to wind up in a better place from the time I entered this event to the end.
Yeah.
And I feel that is been replaced by mechanics.
Yes.
In so many cases, which is unfortunate because you can get to some amazing things by using story. But there's something out of kilter right now, particularly like I think in filmmaking.
Well, there's just so much money involved.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not, when Jimmy's or any of us sit down to do a comic, there aren't millions of dollars at stake.
Now it's just like, I'm going to watch exactly the same story with somebody wearing a different hat.
Yeah. Yes. Right. Yes. That's
what so much of these genre movies are. And it's like, well, there's no surprise. It's like an animation. It used to be every animator back in the 30s and 40s, 50s came from a different art style. They're from all over the world, Japan and Europe, and they come to the United States and they're drawing a woodpecker.
Right.
Everybody draws it differently.
Yeah, I'm generally not following American animation, but from the poster, you know who all the characters are. Oh, this is the husband. He's kind of stupid.
Right.
And that's the wisecracking daughter.
Right.
And that's the studious.
Right. And there's one pose for the wisecracking daughter where she's leaning back a little bit with a smirk on her face and has got one eyebrow up in a certain way.
Right. Probably has a phone in her hand.
Everybody learned what curiosity looks like,
right,
from the same teachers. And so now when I watch an animated film, there are absolute exceptions to this, but that's the thing. It's like, okay, now you're not just story, you're going to see the beats of expressions that explain how a character is thinking in a story. And it's just it's like everything's just plug and play. And where's the discovery, this organic discovery? And that's what I'm looking for.
Well, because people, part of it, I think, does have to do with like what Michael's saying, money. Like I watched the new Doctor Who season last night, and everyone was warning me, oh, there's a Beatles one, and you're going to hate it because they made no attempt to like do any research on the Beatles, which I knew that going in, so fine. So leaving the Beatles part aside, the episode's terrible. It's awkward. It's long. It's strange. But you know what? It's terrible in a super fascinating way because it's like there's two musical numbers and then there's a silent sequence for like too long. And I'm looking at it and go, well, this would have been an amazing 20-minute episode, or you could have cut some of this. But at the same time, I was like, I was thrilled to just watch something fail on its own terms.
Right. Right. Well, that's Mystery Science Theater. We were watching these movies that didn't follow the rules because someone didn't know any better and they couldn't quite act. And so there's constant surprises.
Well, there's surprises too, because they had no budgets and they had to improvise.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the monster comes on, you laugh at the monster, but at the same time, it's a thrill. It's fun.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing is in a world, actually, I think Quentin Tarantino said this, in a world where you can do anything, nothing means anything. So, if you can blow up a computer or a planet on a computer, you can do anything. It has no, so what?
Right. And I guess that's another thing about these lower budget things. There's one person's voice can shine through much more easily than a $200 million budget film that's done. The committees have to look at, like Michael was saying.
Well, that was super interesting and a good conversation. But what we're going to do now is we're going to take a break, go get some water and a snack or something, and then come back and I'm going to tell you all about how I was cyberbullied, and then we'll answer the mail and do some more strips.
All right.
Sound good?
Yeah.
Sure.
Hi, everyone. I just want to take a moment to remind you that all three hosts are cartoonists themselves, and their work is available for sale. You can find links to purchase books by Jimmy, Harold, and Michael on our website. You can also support the show on Patreon or buy us a mud pie. Check out the store link on unpackingpeanuts.com.
And we are back. So let's check the mailbox first, and then we'll see where we're going. I'm hanging out here, Liz. Do we got anything?
We do. We got a message from Autumn Faulkner, who's writing again because she loves our podcast. And she reminds us of the names of what we call the other Woodstocks.
I could do this. No, I can't. It's Bill.
Uh-huh.
Olivier.
Uh-huh.
Harriet.
Yes.
There's one more?
Yep.
What's the initial?
C.
Conrad.
Yes. Good work.
Oh, yeah.
Bravo.
Good. All right.
And she is currently reading the Snoopy First Beagle in Space and noticed how he does, in fact, have different handwriting for most of the characters. Sally's being cursive and Charlie Brown's being just wonky letters. And apparently Spike's being cursive, too. She says, have a wonderful day, and she's crossing her fingers that we don't cancel the podcast once the strips are finished. Oh, plus, there's a P.S. that says, Liz, you should talk more.
Well, that's always true.
There you go.
Well, we won't cancel the podcast because what are we going to do?
Really?
I mean, come on. Not talk endlessly about stuff once a week? I don't think so. Any other?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we got a second one from Megan Bittner, who the subject of the email was "We like Spike." And she says, hello, Unpacking Peanuts. I'm loving the podcast so far. I discovered it in January and started listening from the beginning, and I'm almost caught up.
Wow.
I just finished the 1984 episode, and I have to admit, I've always really liked Spike. I don't know what it is about him. I think I'm just amused by the idea of a beagle who lives in the desert and whose best friend is a cactus. Looking forward to more episodes. Be of good cheer. Megan.
Okay.
Hey, be of good cheer.
Thank you so much, Megan.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to hear from people who like Spike. I'm trying to kind of crack the code a little bit on him because I do know he has fans, and I'm trying to look at him through a new lens as I'm reading these.
Okay, so we have a few legitimate calls to the hotline, and then my cyberbullying. So we'll start. This I don't think this person left their name. So as of now, if it's caller 440.
All righty.
I think Sparky realized he was at his end. He saw his own morality at that point. And I feel that Spike's isolation in the desert kind of maybe reflected that. I mean, look, I'm implying a lot to this, but you guys imply a lot also. So in my head, the tremor had gotten to the point where he couldn't mask it anymore. So I think that's what Spike kind of represented at that point. So.
Well, a solitary figure out in the desert is going to make you think about your mortality, I think. Just the lonely coyotes calling out in the woods.
Add some weight to the character.
What frustrates me is Spike has choices. He doesn't have to live there.
Well, that's everybody who's in a place that they don't need to be.
Which frustrates the hell out of me.
It frustrates the hell out of everybody. But, look, I mean, I can see other people's, the solutions to other people's problems with absolute clarity. My own, impossible.
Right.
Can't be done. I think that's probably the state with Spike, He's like, what's wrong? I didn't, is this weird?
I never met the man. I'm only living through his strips and experiencing through his strips, and then through stories I've heard people tell about Schultz. And you do hear varying stories about this, that there was you'd say underlying he was unhappy, and I can see why he would say that. People would say that, but at the same time, there's a tremendous amount of joy in the stuff I see that comes out of him, and I hear a tremendous amount of stories from his kids, whatever that underlying thing that was a part of him, the melancholy. They wouldn't say that was him.
Correct.
I was just wondering, you guys, having now been on this journey together with that we've all been doing with Schultz, what's your take on that? How do you see Schultz when it comes to being a happy person?
Well, the fact is, nobody else would know except him because he's maybe didn't want to show it.
Mm-hmm.
If he doesn't want to show it and he wants to pretend he's happy, who's going to know the difference?
Because he never comes across as dour, that's not what he's about.
Yeah, but look at you go through any family's photo album from like the 50s, right? Everybody's smiling in every picture because the camera's on.
It's so funny. Back in the 20s, nobody would smile,
right? That's why I like old photography, because people actually didn't smile; they looked like what they were feeling.
But that's funny, because when I look at people from the 20s, I think they're not allowed to show how they're feeling.
Brilliant!
They're miserable. Come on, Abraham Lincoln. Imagine a photo of Abraham Lincoln smiling and giving a thumbs up. I mean,
well, I think that has to happen after the invention of Novocaine. Like, there's not a lot to smile about, Yeah, okay. I feel I can talk about this a little bit, and that, like, I suffer from clinical bipolar depression, bipolar 1. I'm a happy person, I think, at my core. Who am I? I think I'm happy. I have friends and family, and that's all great. I have this other thing too, but I wouldn't say one or the other. Well, no, I would say the joyful part is the core. The other thing is a cancer, metaphorically, right? That's the stuff that you want to exercise from your life. You want to get out. So if part of Peanuts is him successfully excising that, then that's really cool. And if the part that's left is in fact expressed in Spike, that's kind of cool too. Because it does show that it's a part of the world, but it's not the central part of the world. It's off to the side. It's in a different neighborhood. It's still there, but it's not central. Does any of that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah, that does. And I was just thinking about, again, strips of like the 1980s versus the 50s, because Schultz was so influential 36 years in. Schultz's influence is all over those pages in a way that he's not experienced before, and we've not experienced before. And it seems like I was saying that Schultz's world was smaller this year. My general feeling is that comic strips also emotionally got smaller with Schultz. And part of that is, back in the 20s and 30s and 40s, who got a comic strip? What was the person is usually, is a guy, and he's working in a big city newspaper, probably as an illustrator, and he thinks up an idea for a comic strip and he sells it, but he's in this fast moving, hard boiled, heightened environment in the city, at these newspapers. And I think the front page, the movie, the front page, things are just rat-a-tat-tat. And that tends to be, not everybody, but that tends to be who's making these strips. And then Schultz starts this trend where he's a guy out in Minnesota, and he's mailing the stuff in, and everyone's living their own lives in suburbia and who knows where, all over the country. And they're not in that heightened environment. And the strips start to kind of settle down.
I'm not sure I buy that. I mean, where the artist is, Walt Kelly didn't live in a swamp. I don't know where he lived. Did he live in the city?
Bridgeport, Connecticut? I don't know.
Yeah, he hung around a lot of people in his field, And
I think generally they were city people who, came through the art schools, which were only in the big cities, and working for big newspapers. Yeah, so they were probably fairly sophisticated city people who hung around intellectuals. So comics used to be a lot more intellectual.
Well, yeah, and then now you got strips like, I'm thinking of things like Drabble by Kevin Fagan, which was very, very, homebody kind of characters and stories, or Zits, or you name it. There's just a lot more. It just feels a little more suburban and not as high octane. That's the way I see it.
Well, in terms of things being, dark versus light, or smile, or what is the core and what is not. There, this we'll go back to Frank Miller. Actually, this is weird because I have been lugging this around. It's just a printed it out from microfiche in 1990 at my college, and it's an article in the Atlantic on the new comics, and it has a little bit about the new comics, and this was like August 1986. So it was Love and Rockets, Daredevil, whatever. But it focuses mostly on Frank Miller, Howard Chaykin, and Dave Sim. Okay, so here's what I read that blew my mind. Okay, so Miller has attempted to extend the superhero comic and make it carry images and ideas it may not be capable of carrying. But Sim and Chaykin have embraced it. Cerebus, American Flag, and The Shadow aren't so much attempts to transform pulp as they are lively springboard somersaults into the air above it. Where Miller gets down and dirty, Chaykin and Sim get high. That last line I have thought about for 30 years. I was watching or listening to a podcast called, it's the WTF podcast with Mark Maron, and he had Jerry Seinfeld on. And they're two master comedians who don't understand each other at all. And Maron is so frustrated. Like, he wants to try to somehow make this connect. Maron ends up crying in the podcast. It's very awkward.
What?
It's very awkward. Was going through a lot. His partner had passed away a few months ago. And, Seinfeld's just trying to like meet him. And what they don't understand is Maron gets down and dirty and Seinfeld gets high. What the point is, there's a point on ground level that two people will look at something, right? Two artists will look at it. And one will look at it and go, I'm going to take this and I'm going to show all of the depth in it. I'm going to take it as down, and Seinfeld takes it. And so I'm going to take this and make this a toy. And I'm going to see how high I can get it up in the air, right? It's difficult to do both. There's value to do both. They're actually both doing the same thing, just in different directions. Yep. And I don't understand why people can't see Seinfeld's point of it. Even people who like Seinfeld don't realize, and I'm just using him as an example, but people who like that sort of thing often will say, well, it's silly, it's light, it's whatever. It's extremely well thought of. And it's a gift in just the same way as the, in quotes, deeper stuff is. It's just as hard to get you off the ground as it is to put you in the depths.
Yep.
If not harder.
World needs both.
Yep.
So then I was cyberbullied. As you might have heard me mention before, I'm not a huge fan of Ernie Bushmiller's Nancy. Like, to the point that possibly when I was a sophomore in high school and I had to do a report on the Lord of the Flies, I drew Sluggo's head on the stick as the as the cover of the report.
Wow.
I don't like Nancy. However, it turns out a lot of people really do, including our pal Todd Webb, cartoonist Todd Webb. And he went to a place called the Nancy. It was the very first ever Nancy Con. It was at the Billy Ireland Library in Ohio, where all the Nancy fans came. I think they're called the Nancy Boys. I believe that's what their official name is. And he got 16 people at NancyCon, which I think is 3 people more than attended NancyCon, to call me and tell me that they like Nancy. And here's who called.
Hey, this is John Kelly. I'm a writer for the Comics Journal magazine, and I also do a publication called Dummy, and I'm a giant Nancy fan. It's my favorite comic strip, and I've been reading it since the age of 3. I love it, and I'm not alone.
Hi, this is Raina Telgemeir. I'm the creator of Smile, Sisters, Drama, Ghosts, Guts, the Babysitter's Club graphic novels, all of which I started less than 10 years after reading Ernie Bushmiller's Nancy for the first time, and that was the Brian Walker collection with the How to Read Nancy essay in it. And I'd say that essay, that book, along with Understanding Comics, was kind of my guide map after loving comic strips in the newspaper for many years, but not really understanding the mechanics of them and what went into them and how to think about them as much as just the fact that I like making them. So I don't think my work would exist in its current state if it weren't for Ernie Bushmiller. And it's one of me and my dad's favorite things that we share. And yeah, you're wrong, Jimmy.
Hi, my name is Brian Walker, and I love Nancy.
Hi, this is Tony Rectenwald from Chicago. I'm a cartoonist and Nancyophile. You're wrong about Nancy because Nancy is kind of the lens by which we can all appreciate all comics, and understanding Nancy enhances your appreciation of everything from Dick Tracy to even Peanuts. And I think once you sink your teeth deeper into it, you'll kind of see that the shorthand that Bushmiller kind of helped perfect really finds itself in everyone since, and including Schultz, because they were at one time buddies, and I know that relationship went sour. I don't know that's why you're sour about Bushmiller, but I beg you to reconsider, and I'll be tuning in to hear your response.
Hey, it's Tom Gammill, and I think it's all about the gag. It's about the visual gag. That's what makes him so great.
Dennis Kitchen, and I want to say Ernie Bushmiller is king. Ernie rules. You got it? That's all I have to say.
Mark Newgarden. Guys, you know, you're the talk of Nancy Fest here. You really got to reconsider your Bushmiller position. I seriously suggest buying advance tickets for the next Nancy Fest, and we'll be of good cheer in the meantime.
Hi, this is Paul Karasik. I'm a cartoonist and an educator and a Ernie Bushmiller Nancy lover.
Hi, my name is Bill Griffith, and the future of comics is in the past.
Hi, this is Zach Sally. I'm here at Nancy Fest, and to be honest, I mostly came to Nancy Fest to see some comic friends and hang out with them because I love my comic friends and I love comics. But to be honest, I've never been a huge Nancy guy. I just have never quite seen what other folks, sort of the depth of what other folks have seen in Nancy. So I came to this show, and I'm not going to say that I'm a total convert, and now that I'm like, I get Bushmiller and I get the whole thing, but I certainly have a greater newfound understanding and respect for it, and it feels like I'm starting to kind of wrap my head around it.
Yeah, hi, my name is Dick Anderson. I'm calling from Los Angeles, California. Ernie Bushmiller is, at the very least, the second greatest cartoonist, if not the greatest cartoonist of all time.
This is John Porcellino, and I'm just calling to let you know my second favorite cartoonist, Charles M. Schultz, and my number one favorite cartoonist, Ernie Bushmiller. Hi there, Unpacked Peanuts. My name is Peter Bell. Yeah, I was very displeased to hear your non-endorsement of Nancy and your complete ignorant understanding of greatness that is Nancy and living the Nancy lifestyle. I feel like you really need to reassess this urgently and maybe reconvene at some other point. But thank you. Have a good day.
Hey, this is Dennis Telgemeir, and I am the father of Raina Telgemeir, and we are both huge fans of Ernie and of Nancy and of Sluggo and all the rest of the Bushmiller family. We've traveled over 2,000 miles to experience the Nancy Fest. Ain't nothing quite like it. We're glad we're here. It's wonderful to be around an auditorium filled with Nancy fans. Wish we were here to enjoy it too.
Hey, Unpacking Peanuts. This is Todd Webb calling in. I hope you enjoyed the messages from my fellow Ernie Bushmiller fans at the inaugural Nancy Fest at the Billy Ireland Museum of Cartoon Art. Delightful time was had by all. And, yeah, Jimmy, we'll talk. That's a wrap for now. Be of good cheer, fellas. And Liz.
But here's the thing I want to tell you. You nerds can suck it. I don't care what you think. But because look, anytime four nerds are together, they're going to be aggrieved. But the last one we got was a call from Raina's dad.
Oh,
so he talked about how he read it to her when she was a little girl. That moves me. Okay. So here's what we're going to do.
Well, wait a second, Jimmy. You realize that we're four nerds.
No, I don't count you. You're not a nerd.
You keep us away from being fully agreed.
No, you absolutely are not a nerd. These other two knuckleheads and me, well, okay. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to pick a Nancy book, and Todd said he'll help me, and I'm going to read it all the way through at one Nancy book, and then I'm going to give a little book report, and I'm going to go into it, assuming that Nancy's great and that everything you guys are saying about it is true, and then I'll tell you what I think of Nancy, and then we'll let the Nancy thing drop, which will be great. And I want to be clear. I am not doing this for you cartoonists. You may be legends. You may be icons, but I'm only doing this because I don't want Raina's dad mad at me. Now, but listen, I do have to know because then if it keeps up after that, then I'm going to have to show up at NancyCon 2 next year, and things will get ugly. Now, listen, if I have to fight these goons, I need to know. Do you have my back?
Yeah, this is war.
No, I was talking to Liz, guys.
Oh, I'm at war.
I mean, come on.
We can't let these people take over the culture.
Yeah. Well, here's that new lens for us to look through.
So that's fun. Thanks for everybody who made a call. I mean, it was really cool to hear all those famous voices on the phone. And I will get back to you with my Nancy book report. So there you go.
Excellent.
All right, let's get back to the strips. What do you say?
Sure. It's about time.
February 10th, 1986. The World War I flying ace is atop the Sop with Gammill, and he thinks to himself, here's the World War I flying ace high over no man's land. Lucy comes up and says, I suppose you think you're flying over no man's land, huh? Well, what about no woman's land? Snoopy thinks about this and then continues, here's the World War I flying ace high over no person's land.
That's a solution.
I've had this actual conversation. About the term no man's land.
Really?
Yes. Sherilyn Fenn.
Name drop a little bit. Huh?
Okay. Sherilyn Fenn, who is Audrey on Twin Peaks, wrote a book called No Man's Land, and we were working on an adaptation of it together for a little while there. And that was the response we got from people. Sure you want to call it No Man's Land? Okay.
It's funny because you could say no man's land is woman's land.
Oh my God, my mind is blown, Harold.
We're talking about trenches, muddy trenches here, okay?
In theory.
Women like muddy trenches too.
They like mud pies, I know that.
February 15th, we see the World War I flying ace has come down with some influenza, and he's been taken care of by the beautiful French lass, who is, of course, Marcy. So she comes up to him as he's lying there in his sick bed and says, Bonjour, monsieur. How are you feeling today? I brought you a newspaper. I thought you might like to have me read to you. The war is still going badly. The troop ship Leviathan docked at Brest with 10,000 men aboard. 4,000 of them had the flu. And then Snoopy, lying there, sick in his bed, says, don't you have any comic books?
This sequence confused the heck out of me.
Why is that?
Because she's in his fantasy. He cast Marcy to be in his fantasy. That's not Marcy.
Or is it?
It's Snoopy. It's Snoopy's imagination.
So you don't think that these are them somehow playing together?
No, they can't play together. I mean,
okay.
It's just, I don't understand what's happening here.
Well, you know what? I think there are online services you can call and talk through that.
Okay. I'm very
But I think it's just a little cartoon girl playing with a little cartoon dog.
I don't think so. I think it's an imaginary girl playing with a cartoon dog.
Well, this is probably the longest sequence that I was referring to, the bodily illness throughout these first 4 months. And yes, Snoopy's down with the flu. And it's interesting that Schultz goes out of his way not to call it the Spanish flu, because that was we don't know the origins, and he goes into all of that. But when did they do that? What have we learned, Charlie Brown, and where the kids go over to Europe and figure out the war?
Someone should do a podcast that finds out those things.
Right.
Actually, somebody does do a podcast that talks about that. The new Peppermint Patty podcast was just talking about that for Memorial Day.
The What Have We Learned, Charlie Brown. No, let's see. I'm just looking at my IMDb thing here. Oh, 1983. So I'm beforehand. Okay.
February 22nd. Sally's listening to the radio and she's annoyed. She says, they did it again. She's so annoyed that she kicks the radio and sends it flying. Boy, that makes me mad. They play a song on the radio, but they don't tell you what it was. Charlie Brown, without looking up from his book in his beanbag, says, that was the national anthem.
Shazam! I remember our radio would start in the morning with the national anthem, and I forget somebody was singing the Lord's Prayer on the I think it was KFRU radio in Columbia, Missouri. A lot of times the AM radio stations would have the broadcast day because you could only broadcast up until the evening, and then you'd lose the signal. You couldn't. So something was going on there, and so they'd actually would have beginnings and ends of broadcast day like the TV stations used to. Those were the days.
Yeah, I just think it's really funny. What I think is funny is just the way he doesn't look up from his book. That's what I love.
That's interesting. That's the reason. Yeah, that's
the
funny.
Outrage, the level of outrage with Sally, and the lack of reaction from Charlie Brown.
Well, I absolutely related to the being younger on the radio, and you were at the mercy of you couldn't look it up on their website, and they would play through like 6 songs in a row, and number 4 is the one like, oh, this is amazing, and you're like, are they going to go through the list? And then they like cut to an ad, and like, oh, I'll never know what that song was.
And you'd sit there with your cassette recorder, hoping that they'll play it, and then you could record it.
Yeah. Those are the days.
So we are lucky enough to have a few guests with us today. Bernie Adama and Shaylee Robson are hanging out backstage. Turns out this is Bernie's favorite strip of the ones we selected. So do we have any insight into why that is?
Yes, he says it's the anger over something as familiar as the national anthem and her ignorance of it.
Well, it sounds like she liked it if she was getting really upset not knowing what it was. So it must have had an impact on her this time.
And he thinks that Charlie Brown delivers the perfect punchline.
He does. You want to know something embarrassing about me?
What's that?
I find it very hard not to tear up at the national anthem. Isn't that
it's
weird?
not a bad song.
Oh, say does that Star-Spangled Banner yet wave? That kills me, man.
Yeah. Good song. Impossible to sing, I hear.
Impossible to sing.
Not bad.
So, it's a pick hit to click. Got a good beat, you can dance to it.
Shout out to Francis Scott Key.
March 5th, Rerun is on the back of the bike again, sitting in his little chair. He's wearing a helmet this time, and he says, so here I am, riding on the back of my mom's bicycle. I like my new helmet. Mom's become very safety conscious. And then we see he turns his head, and written on the back of the helmet is baby on bike. That's a very 80s thing, baby on board.
I'm telling you, being a kid was out of style in the 70s into the early 80s, and then all of a sudden baby on boards popped up everywhere.
You're the only person in the world who has a fondness for baby on board signs. You've got to explain this to me.
Come on. I mean, when this was my thing. I was born in 1966, and I was a kid, and I didn't mind being a kid, and I enjoyed seeing kid movies and all that sort of stuff. And it was hard to find like a movie that was made for kids in this era. I was like, people did not want to be kids in this time frame. I don't know what it was, but it was like you couldn't become an adult fast enough. So like your kids movie growing up would be the Bad News Bears, foul mouth movie, that sort of thing.
Exactly like my childhood. Totally like my childhood. Slightly more G-rated than my childhood, but love that movie.
Well, and then that's just it. Things that normally would be G-rated in any other world, all of a sudden were PG-rated, just because it was the kiss of death to be rated G unless it was a Disney movie, and even those weren't doing terribly well at the time. So it was just it was something I was very cognizant of, because there was stuff. And if you went to the Jeppy Museum in Baltimore, there was the Pop Culture Museum. The quality of kids' toys and the designs of them, like what Bugs Bunny looked like in 70s products, is scary. It's like, who drew this thing? It's like, they're not on model. I don't know what happened in this era, but it just went incredibly downhill for kids. And then right around the 80s, all of a sudden, people were having kids again, and they were just starting to have insular families, and that was a thing again. But I really saw that baby on board sign as the bellwether that, oh, people are caring about kids again.
That's tragic, Harold, but okay.
It really is. But we're not talking about the elephant in the room.
Oh, yeah.
What?
The Zippitone. All I can see is Zippitone. No, I am actually, I'm not anti-Zippitone. I mean, you look at,
that's good.
I have a book of one of the first collections of Flash Gordon, the Alex Raymond stuff, black and white. And the books, there was the strip was meant for color. It was Sunday. And they Zippitone it. It was gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. But this, to me, I mean, this doesn't look too bad, but
I like Zippitone. I think it looks fine. It doesn't bother me at all. I think it's a weird choice, but I think it's totally related to his ongoing health concerns.
Yeah, I do think it works well here.
Yeah, it's going to be a thing going throughout. We'll see it here on the next one.
Well, and Shaylee adds that she thinks that Mrs. Van Pelt drew that with a Sharpie.
She definitely did. Yeah, that's not a branded product.
No.
Yeah, he doesn't totally change styles. I mean, the next one that we picked has Zippitone, but generally they come in every now and then.
Yeah, it's an every now. I'm sure it has something to do with how he feels. March 11th, here we go. Linus is watching TV in a Zippitoned beanbag chair, and he says, "This program was brought to you as a public service." The TV is saying this. "Consult your paper for a complete listing of future programs. And now for community reminder." And we see Linus is just drifting off to sleep at this, and the TV yells, "Wake up!" sending his hair straight up into the air. I picked this because I missed the previous strip that had the Zippitone and was going to say, "Hey, Michael, there's the first Zippitone."
Right. And I didn't notice the one in the rerun either. This was the one.
Okay.
Me.
Really?
Yeah, which shows the masterful use of Zippitone in the.
Yeah. No, it didn't register to me at all.
But it really jumped out here for me too, Jimmy.
That's so weird. Is it just, do you think, because it's too much? Or not too much, but that it's more rather than?
Well, I don't know. Maybe it's
not even more.
It just works so much better for me in the rerun strip in terms of just visually, design wise. It didn't register.
It's smaller. Yeah, I've been dreading this. I didn't know when it was going to come. I was warned by Jimmy that it was coming soon, so I was keeping an eye out for it.
Well, that's going to be a part of it going forward. Just so settle in.
It's interesting looking at this strip here. One of the theories, we just mentioned it again, is that photocopiers really became very common in the 1980s. And there's a photocopier in Schultz's office. There's just no way there wasn't. And who knows when that started. But as they got better and better, I think a lot of cartoonists would, instead of sending the originals in, which could get lost in the mail or whatever, you would make photocopies of your art, sometimes shrinking it down, and you would send that to the syndicate instead of your originals. The problem was it's one generation down, and I think the thing that gets hurt the most when you photocopy something are Zippitone dots, because they're so even, they're so consistent, they're so small. Any inconsistency in the photocopy tends to muddy that. And when I look at the thing that's on Go Comics, that looks to me like a photocopied version or a printed version of the Zippitone. When I look at the art in the Fantagraphics books, it looks like they had access to the original art, and it looks much crisper.
And muddy is the word. You said muddy. That is what the problem is, seeing it on that beanbag strip. It is a large muddy area on each of the panels, as opposed to just a crisp gray.
Yeah, so the March 5th one might be from Fantagraphics. You can really see the dot pattern.
You can really see the dots, yeah. Yep, and then you really see, that is great. Yeah, if you go on Go Comics, like Michael is saying, you can really see the dots on the March 5th chair to see the Zippitone. And then, like Harold is saying, on the 11th strip, it really is clearly muddied.
Smaller, too.
I mean, I think you're probably right there, Harold. March 16th. It's a Sunday. We start off with one of them there symbolic panels, Charlie Brown lying atop a kite. And in the next panel, we see it's Marcy on the phone, and she says, "Right now? Good." And then Peppermint Patty says, "Where are you going, Marcy?" They're outside at this point. Marcy walks past her saying, to watch Charles fly a kite. It's something I've always wanted to see. So she does this, and Charlie Brown actually has the kite in the air for a few panels. But in the second panel of him having it in the air, he loses the bobbin or whatever you would call it that holds the string round up on it. And Marcy ends up getting caught up in the string and then gets taken up into the air. And so that Charlie Brown is now dragging a completely caught up Marcy in the kite string. And Pepper and Patty comes over to see what's going on and says, well, what do you think? And then Pepper and Patty sees the result of it. And it's Charlie Brown and Marcy hanging upside down from the tree with the kite. And Marcy says, it was an experience.
Marcy seems like the character who reads Peanuts. You know, she's read this strip. She's heard about this kite. Mm-hmm. She's this outside commentator in the world of Peanuts who gets to go inside every once in a while. I picked this strip because I thought it was a really great example of the mastery of design that Schultz is so good at. You know, we've been talking about the struggles with individual lines, but in terms of designing a Sunday page, this is just a masterpiece. And the life in the line really makes for a beautiful, beautiful strip.
I love the panels of Marcy dealing with getting her foot caught up in the string and then leading to that first panel on the third tier with her just stoically being hauled up into the sky. That's really great. I also love that Charlie Brown doesn't stop. He's like, the kite's in the air. We got to keep going. Whether or not Marcy is being drug along.
Right. And I think Marcy's response, it was an experience, was pretty classic Marcy.
Yeah, she's pretty stoic, isn't she?
Yeah.
And that's kind of a way of not really being too judgmental.
Right. Yeah, she just accepts it and moves on. March 30th. Lucy is kind of sitting on her knees, and she looks at the back of her hand and says, oh no. Linus from the other room yells, what's the matter? As she comes over and shows Linus and says, look at the bump on the back of my hand. Linus says, you have a ganglion. You know how they say to cure it? You have someone hit it with a Bible. Lucy says, with a what? And then Linus says, I wonder which translation would work best. I suppose they used the King James in the old days. The Revised Standard should work just as well, as he's looking at a bookshelf full of books. Then he says, maybe the Tyndale, or maybe the Douay, or maybe we should use the Moffat. That's the Bible that's done by the guy who runs the Doctor Who series. That's weird, the Moffat. What are you mumbling about, says Lucy. Here, hit it with this. And Linus stands up on a little ottoman and smacks Lucy on the head with the book. And Lucy yells, says, what do you think you're doing? You were supposed to hit my hand. Linus says, sorry, you moved. I'm going to do what I should have done, says Lucy. I'm going to call our doctor. And then Linus yells out after her, wait a minute, this was a tale of two cities. Best of times, it was the worst of times.
Had you guys heard about this before?
Where are the parents? She has like a growth on her hand. Linus, the 3-year-old, is going to call the doctor of the 6-year-old.
Again, this is more bodily weirdness going on these first months. But had you guys heard about this whole thing with the ganglion cyst and hitting it?
No.
I have not heard of any aspect of this.
I haven't either. So I'm going to chalk this up as an obscurity.
Peanuts Obscurities Explained.
Yes,
I did a little bit of research on it, and so essentially there's this lubricating fluid around your joints, and when a little hole can grow around the joint where it slowly escapes. It's like this really viscous liquid, and then it forms this ganglion, and it can get pretty big. Often it's on the wrist. And a temporary solution, and apparently there was a guy in England who said, you just hit the thing with the Bible. This was like the accepted thing. This doctor said that's what you're supposed to do, and that will release the fluid, and the cyst will go away. And And of course, what did most people have if they had a book back in the 1800s or whatever?
Right.
It's probably the family Bible. It's the big solid thing you can do to just slam this, slam your wrists. And I was reading online, you know, when you go to the WebMDs and all of that, I'm like, should you hit your ganglion cyst?
Yeah.
And this thing's like, well, of course, you know, you shouldn't do this. This is you know, you're going to cause internal bleeding and blah 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 and all this stuff. But then I found this 2016 medical study, and get this. This is how medical studies are done now. A bunch of researchers went on YouTube and searched ganglion cyst, and they watched videos that people had done of slamming their wrists with large books. And what they did is they saw if it was 2 years old or older, they would then find a way to contact the person on YouTube and say, how'd it go? And according to the 2016 medical study from YouTube videos, it was 83% effective in getting rid of the cyst, and 55% reported that there was no recurrence after that. So so YouTube is now a way for us to check against things that they couldn't really try in a lab. It would be considered abuse if they're slamming people with books.
Wouldn't there be all this gunk on the Bible?
We had a friend back in New Hampshire, Nurse Gina. She talked about hitting something with a book. So I bet that was what it was.
Yeah, and she's a nurse.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, yeah, I had a terrible sty years ago, and I went to the doctor, and she said, well, did you try poking it with a needle? No, it's in my eye. What are you talking about? She's like, oh, a lot of people just poke it with the needle and it goes away. I'm like, no, you poke it with the needle.
I thought you said, have you tried turning around 3 times and throwing rice in the air?
Lime and a coconut.
I don't believe anything like that. I believe science, like if you get a wart, bury a potato. I mean, things like that, of course.
Well, sure.
Turn it
It has to be russet.
Absolutely. Yeah. Otherwise, it's just not medicine. All right. So that'll bring us to the end now. We talked a little longer because we had the Nancy stuff and all that. So look in the fullness of time for an episode coming up where I read Nancy and tell you how great it is. But until then, if you want to continue this conversation, you can find us on good old social media. We're at Unpacking Peanuts on Facebook, Blue Sky, and YouTube, and we're at Unpack Peanuts on Instagram and Threads. And we would love to hear from you. My account on Twitter has been hijacked, so stay tuned to see what happens there. Other than that, come back next week where we will be picking up 1986, talking about more great strips and our own weird obsessions. So until then, for Michael, Harold, and Liz, this is Jimmy saying, be of good cheer.
Yes.
Be
of good cheer.
Be of good cheer.
Unpacking Peanuts is copyright Jimmy Gownley, Michael Cohen, and Harold Buchholz. Produced and edited by Liz Sumner. Music by Michael Cohen. Additional voiceover by Aziza Shakrala Clark. For more from the show, follow Unpack Peanuts on Instagram and Threads, Unpacking Peanuts on Facebook, Blue Sky, and YouTube. For more about Jimmy, Michael, and Harold, visit unpackingpeanuts.com. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for listening.
There's nothing worse.